This is my true story. I worked for decades so my son could live in comfort. I paid for his schooling, his clothes, his home, and I believed he would respect me when I grew old. But one evening, when I was weak and hungry, I asked him for an extra portion of food. He looked me in the eye, raised his hand, and slapped me across the face. My heart shattered, but I did not shout back. I planned instead. And you won't believe what I did next. Before that, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is. And please subscribe so my story can reach more people. All my life, I believed that the work of a father was to give, and the joy of a father was to see his child grow strong. From the day my son was born, I promised myself he would never suffer the way I suffered in my younger years. I came from nothing, and I wanted him to have everything. So I worked. I worked long days and long nights, sometimes with no rest, sometimes with no food in my own stomach, just so he could eat better than me. I remember when he was a little boy, his shoes were always new, even though mine had holes in them. His school bag was always full, even though my pockets were often empty. When he grew older and needed better schools, I took extra jobs. I carried heavy loads. I stood in the sun until my skin burned. I worked with machines until my hands bled. Each drop of sweat I gave with love. Every cent I saved with him in mind. When he became a young man, I helped him clear his debts. I told him, "Do not worry, son. I will take care of it." I gave him a home to live in, with strong walls and a roof that would never leak. That home was built on my back, my effort, my sacrifice. I thought he would look at those walls and remember what his father had given him. I thought he would walk through that house with gratitude. When he married, I paid for the wedding. I wanted him to stand tall in front of everyone, proud of his family. I wanted no whispers, no shame, only happiness for him. And when bills came, when struggles came, when he needed help, I was there. Even in my old age, when my body was tired and my bones ached, I still reached into my savings and gave to him. I did not keep money for myself. I did not buy new clothes. I did not eat at good restaurants. I did not travel. Every coin I earned was turned into his future. Every comfort I denied myself was turned into his comfort. That was my role as a father, and I accepted it with pride. But in the back of my mind, I always believed one thing. When I grew old, he would care for me in return. I believed my sacrifices would be remembered. I believed my love would be honored. I believed respect would come back to me in the same way I gave it to him. That was the dream that carried me through my hardest days. I thought old age would mean peace. I thought it would mean sitting at the table with him, sharing stories, eating meals, and being cared for with gentle words. I thought it would mean walking into the last years of my life with dignity, not with shame. That was what I worked for. That was what I sacrificed for. But instead, I was met with impatience. Instead, I was met with anger. Instead, I was met with a slap when I asked for food. The same man I starved myself for. The same man I built a home for. The same man I protected with my whole life. He raised his hand against me. That moment cut deeper than any wound from work, deeper than any pain from years of labor. Still, before that slap came, I lived my whole life in sacrifice for him. And that is why the slap hurt so much. Because it was not just a strike against my face. It was a strike against every sacrifice I ever made. It was a strike against love. Cruelty does not begin with a slap. It starts small, like shadows that grow longer every evening. At first, I did not see it clearly. I told myself he was just tired, just stressed, just busy. But slowly, I realized those were not excuses. They were the first cracks in the respect that was once there. I remember the first time he raised his voice at me over something small. I asked him if we had rice for dinner, and he snapped, "Why do you always ask about food? Are you greedy?" I stood in silence, shocked, but I tried to smile and say nothing. I thought maybe it was just a bad day. Then came the comments during meals. The portions he gave me grew smaller, while his plate stayed full. When I asked politely for a little more, he would sigh loudly and say, "You should be thankful you are getting anything at all." Those words cut deeper than hunger. Thankful? Did he forget the nights I went hungry just to make sure he never missed a meal as a child? Did he forget how I worked myself sick so he would never feel the pain of an empty stomach? Over time, the sharp words became normal. He no longer spoke to me like a father. He spoke to me like a burden. When I coughed, he said, "You are too loud." When I walked slowly, he said, "Move faster, you're wasting time." When I sat in my chair for too long, he said, "Do you do nothing but sit around all day?" Each sentence chipped away at my heart. I told myself not to answer back because I still hoped he would remember love one day. Even at family gatherings, I noticed the change. He no longer introduced me with pride. He no longer said, "This is my father who built this home." Instead, he ignored me, or worse, made little jokes at my expense. He would say, "My father eats too much. He never gets enough." His wife laughed, and others laughed awkwardly, not knowing how much those words hurt. I sat there quietly, pretending not to hear, but my heart heard every word. I began to notice the way he looked at me, too. No longer with respect, but with impatience. His eyes, once filled with love when he was a child, now carried annoyance. When I asked for small things, like help with the garden or company in the evening, he rolled his eyes, as if my needs were too heavy for him to carry. I was not asking for gold or riches. I was only asking for time, for care, for kindness. But even those were denied. I told myself maybe his wife was influencing him. Maybe she whispered into his ear, making him believe I was a burden. Or maybe it was his own pride, thinking he had built his life alone, forgetting who laid the foundation. Whatever the reason, the cruelty grew sharper. And each day, I swallowed the pain in silence. The first signs of cruelty were warnings, but I ignored them because I still believed in my heart that a son cannot turn fully against his father. I was wrong. What began with small words grew into harsh commands. What began with impatience grew into open disrespect. And what began with mockery ended in violence. The night he slapped me, I realized that all the signs were pointing here. I had seen it coming, but I did not want to accept it. I thought patience would change him. But patience only gave him more space to grow cruel. The son I raised with sacrifice had turned into a man who saw me as nothing. It happened one night, and I will never forget it. I was sitting at the table, my plate almost empty. My stomach was not full, but I stayed quiet because I did not want to cause trouble. He and his wife were eating with no worry, their plates filled high, their laughter filling the room. I looked at my small portion, and my hunger grew stronger. With a soft voice, I asked, "Son, may I have a little more food?" Just a little more. It was not a demand. It was not greed. It was simply hunger. He stopped chewing and turned to me with a cold stare. His face tightened, his eyes sharp with anger. Without a word, he stood up, walked over to me, and before I could even understand, his hand struck across my face. The slap was hard, loud, and filled with fury. My cheek burned instantly, the sting spreading across my skin. I froze in shock. My body trembled, not from the force, but from the disbelief. The room went silent for a moment. Even his wife stopped laughing and looked on with wide eyes. But then he spoke, his voice colder than the slap itself. "You should be grateful for what you get. Stop asking like a greedy old man." He sat back down and continued eating, as if nothing had happened. His wife looked at him, then at me, and gave a small, cruel smirk. I touched my cheek gently, feeling the heat where his hand had landed. The pain was nothing compared to the wound in my heart. That slap carried more than anger. It carried disrespect, hatred, and a complete loss of love. In that single moment, all the years of sacrifice flashed before me. Nights I worked without sleep. Days I ate little so he could eat full. Times I protected him with my life. And now, that same son had raised his hand against me because I asked for food. I sat there in silence, my hands shaking on the table. I could not eat anymore. Each bite would have been mixed with tears. I lowered my head and stared at the empty plate. My mind filled with questions. How could he do this? What had I done to deserve this? How did the boy I once carried in my arms become the man who struck me down? The sting of his words hurt even more. Be grateful for what you get. As if food was not my right in the house I built. As if every grain of rice on that table was not there because of me. As if he had forgotten completely that everything he enjoyed came from my sacrifices. That sentence repeated in my head again and again, breaking me deeper than the slap. That night was not just about hunger. It was not just about food. It was about dignity. It was about respect. And both had been taken from me in front of his wife, in front of the walls of the house I built with my sweat. I went to my room after the meal, my cheeks still burning, my heart shattered. I sat on my bed in the dark, unable to sleep, unable to close my eyes without seeing his hand raised against me. That moment marked the line. Before, there had been insults, small cruelties, sharp words. But now, his cruelty had turned into violence. The son I had sacrificed my life for had turned into my oppressor. And in that silence, while I held my cheek and let tears fall, a new thought began to grow inside me. If he could slap me for food, if he could humiliate me for hunger, then he believed I had no power left. He believed I was weak, powerless, and dependent on him. But he was wrong. He had forgotten that while he controlled the food on the table, I still controlled the money in the bank. That night, after the slap, I sat in my room with the light off. The house was quiet, but inside me, everything was loud. My cheek still burned where his hand struck me. I pressed my palm against it, but the sting did not fade. It was not only my skin that hurt, it was my soul. The slap was not just against my face, it was against my years of sacrifice, it was against my love, it was against the bond of father and son. I stared at the walls of my room, the same walls I had built with my own hands, and they felt strange to me. They no longer gave me comfort. They no longer felt like home. They felt like a cage where my dignity had been beaten down. I thought of the table where it happened. I thought of the plate where I had asked for a little more food. I thought of how quickly his hand rose, how quickly his words cut. Be grateful for what you get. Those words echoed in my mind, louder than the slap itself. I sat on the bed and closed my eyes, and memories came flooding in. I remembered the nights when he was a little boy, crying from hunger, and I gave him my portion so he would not sleep empty. I remembered carrying heavy bags of rice through rain so he would never miss a meal. I remembered working with an empty stomach so he could sit at the table with a full plate. And now, years later, the same boy who once depended on me for every bite of food had slapped me for asking a little more. The shame was heavy. I did not cry loudly. My tears fell quietly, rolling down my cheeks in the darkness. Each tear carried years of memory, years of sacrifice, years of broken hope. I whispered to myself, "Is this what fatherhood means? To give everything, only to be treated like nothing?" The silence in the room answered me with emptiness. The humiliation did not end with the slap. It grew in the hours that followed. I could still hear their laughter from the dining room, soft and cruel. They laughed as if nothing had happened. They laughed while my cheek still burned. That laughter felt like knives. It told me I was not respected. It told me I was not valued. It told me that in their eyes, I was less than human. The next morning, I looked in the mirror. My face showed the red mark where his hand had struck me. My eyes were swollen from tears. I did not see the strong father who once built a home, who once worked day and night. I saw an old man broken by his own son. I saw humiliation written across my skin. When I walked into the yard, neighbors greeted me, but I could not look them in the eye. I felt they would see the shame inside me. Maybe they did not know what had happened, but my heart believed the world could see it. My steps were heavy. My chest was heavy. My soul was heavy. At meals after that night, I stayed silent. I took whatever portion was given to me. I lowered my head and ate quietly, afraid to ask for more. Every time I looked at him, I remembered the slap. Every time I looked at his wife, I remembered the laughter. And each bite I took tasted bitter, even if the food was sweet. The humiliation lived inside me like fire, but it was not a fire that destroyed me. It was a fire that burned slowly, quietly, shaping something new in me. I realized then that silence was not surrender. My silence was my preparation. I would not shout. I would not fight with words. I would not raise my hand like he did. My revenge would not come from anger. It would come from control. Yes, I had been slapped. Yes, I had been humiliated. But I was not powerless. I still carried something greater than food, greater than strength, greater than pride. I carried control of the money. I carried the final say in every account, every business, every paper. He had forgotten that. He believed the slap made him powerful. He believed denying me food made him master. But he was wrong. That night of humiliation became my turning point. I told myself, I will never beg again. I will never ask again. And I will never forget what he did. He made me feel like nothing. But I would show him that the man he thought was powerless still held the power to take everything away. My son thought the slap ended everything. He thought that by raising his hand, by giving me small food, by using sharp words, he had become the master. In his mind, I was weak, old, and dependent. He believed my strength was gone. He believed I had no power left. But he forgot something very important. The truth was simple. The food he controlled was nothing compared to the future I still held in my hands. All his life, he ate from my work. The house he lived in stood on land I paid for. The roof above his head was built by my sweat. Every account in the bank had my name. Every property paper carried my signature. Even the business he bragged about was started with my money, my support, my sacrifice. Without me, none of it existed. Yet he forgot. He believed because I was old, because my hands shook and my walk was slow, I had no control. But the truth was, I had more control than he ever imagined. I was still the owner of the house. I was still the name on the deeds. I was still the one who had the legal right to every coin in the bank. And even though he treated me like a burden, I was the one keeping his life standing. If I chose, I could take it all away in a single day. He did not know that the rope he tied around me was not strong. The real rope was in my hands, wrapped around his future. That night, sitting in silence, I thought deeply. I remembered the slap, the sting on my cheek, the taste of shame. But then I remembered the papers in my drawer, the account numbers in my book, the lawyer who still called me sir. And I realized something powerful. He thought he had broken me, but he had only awakened me. He showed me what he truly was. And by doing that, he gave me the reason to use the power he had forgotten I had. In my heart, there was pain. But inside that pain, there was also strength. My body might have been weak, but my pen was strong. My voice in front of the bank was strong. My decision in the lawyer's office was strong. He could control my plate, but I could control his future. And futures are worth far more than meals. I began to think of all the ways I had helped him. Clearing his debts, paying for his wedding, building his comfort, giving him my trust. And I realized he believed all those things were his by right. He believed they would always be there, no matter how he treated me. That belief was his mistake. He forgot that nothing belonged to him yet. Everything was still mine. His cruelty blinded him to this truth. He thought age meant weakness. He thought silence meant defeat. But I knew silence could be power too. He thought the slap made him stronger. But in reality, it made me sharper. It reminded me that I was not at his mercy. He was at mine. I decided that night that I would not argue with him anymore. I would not beg him for respect. I would not plead for kindness. Number. I would show him through action that cruelty has a cost. He thought he could humiliate me and walk away smiling. But he would soon learn that a father may grow old, but he never loses his power. I looked at the walls of the house and whispered to myself, "This is still mine." And soon, it will no longer be his. I looked at my hands, trembling with age, and whispered, "These hands still hold the pen that can erase his name." I looked at the bank book and whispered, "This is the rope around him, not the one he tied around me." He forgot the truth. He forgot who made him. He forgot who built the life he lived. But I had not forgotten. And I was ready to remind him, not with words, but with the kind of revenge that would leave him empty, desperate, and broken. That night, after hours of silence, I finally understood what I had to do. The slap on my face had left more than pain. It had left a clear choice. Either I could continue living under his cruelty, eating from his table with shame, waiting for the next insult, the next strike, or I could take back the power that was always mine. I sat alone, my heart heavy, but my mind sharp. I thought of my life, all the sacrifices I had made, all the years of labor that built the very world he now enjoyed. And then I thought of the moment his hand struck me. That was the moment the father in me died, and the man of justice was born. I made the decision that night. He would lose everything. Not just money, not just comfort, but everything he thought was guaranteed. The inheritance he dreamed of, the house he bragged about, the business he called his own. All of it would slip through his fingers. And I would not stop there. I would make sure he faced the law for what he did. He thought a slap was nothing. But in the eyes of justice, it was abuse. And in the eyes of his father, it was betrayal. The decision did not come from hate. It came from clarity. I realized that love had blinded me for too long. I had forgiven too many small insults. I had closed my eyes when the first signs of cruelty appeared. I had told myself he would change. But he did not change. He only grew worse. And if I kept silent, he would keep growing worse still. Number. The time for silence was over. The time for action had arrived. I decided I would start with the one thing he cared about most: money. He thought his life was secure because my name was on every account, every paper, every deed. He thought my old age meant I had forgotten that. But I had not forgotten. I knew exactly what power I held, and now I would use it. I would empty the accounts. I would move the money. I would rewrite the papers. I would cut his name out of every document that carried it. By the time I was finished, he would realize that the food he slapped me over was nothing compared to the fortune I had taken away from him. But I also knew money alone would not teach him the full lesson. Money could be earned again, debts could be paid, houses could be rebuilt. What he needed to lose was something deeper: his pride, his arrogance, his belief that he was untouchable. So I decided I would go further. I would call my lawyer and make changes to my will. He would no longer be my heir. His bloodline would no longer carry my legacy. He would no longer walk proudly with my name on his lips. That name, which I had carried with honor all my life, would end with me rather than pass to cruelty. And beyond that, I made another decision. I would go to the police. Many fathers stay silent when abused by their children because of shame. But I decided I would not hide what he did. I would show the world his cruelty. I would show the world the rope burns of his words, the slap of his hand, the bruises of his disrespect. I would let the law hold him accountable for the crime of humiliating his own father. He thought the neighbors admired him. He thought people respected him. But soon they would see the truth. They would see him as the man who raised his hand against the one who gave him life. The more I thought of it, the stronger my resolve became. My tears dried. My back straightened. I felt the power return to me, not in my body, but in my spirit. The decision gave me strength I thought I had lost. I no longer felt weak. I no longer felt small. I no longer felt like a beggar at his table. I felt like a man again. A father who had been betrayed, but who still had the power to deliver justice. That night, I did not sleep. I sat awake, planning every step in my mind. How I would go to the bank, how I would meet the lawyer, how I would speak to the police. Each step was clear, and each step brought me closer to freedom. I realized something important. Sometimes, silence is not peace. Sometimes, silence is prison. And that night, I chose to break my prison. I chose justice. I chose revenge. The next morning, I rose early. My body was tired. My face still ached where his hand had landed, but my mind was strong. I dressed slowly, with purpose, and held my papers close to me. Every step I took out of that house was heavy, but it was also freeing. For the first time in years, I was not walking to serve him, not walking to provide for him. I was walking to end his power over me. My first stop was the bank. I walked inside quietly, greeted the clerk, and handed over my documents. The accounts were still under my name. Every cent that fed his luxuries, every coin that gave him pride, was still mine. I signed the forms with a steady hand. Transfer here. Close this. Move that. Within an hour, the balances that gave him confidence were gone. I moved the money to new accounts where his name could not touch them. The numbers that once made him smile were now reduced to zero. His future vanished with the stroke of a pen. From the bank, I went to see my lawyer. He looked at me with surprise, for I had never come to him with such resolve. I placed the papers on his desk and told him, "Erase his name. Erase it everywhere." The lawyer asked if I was sure, and I nodded, more sure than I had ever been. We rewrote the will. We cut him out completely. Every property, every piece of land, every bit of wealth that he believed would one day be his was reassigned. Some went to charities. Some went to neighbors who had shown me kindness. Some went to relatives who respected me quietly when he mocked me loudly. Piece by piece, the world he thought belonged to him was stripped away. But I did not stop there. I also told the lawyer I wanted his rights to my family name removed. My name was built on sacrifice, on sweat, on dignity. I would not let that name continue through the hands of a son who dishonored it. My lawyer prepared the legal documents, and with one signature, I cut his tie to my legacy. He would no longer be the heir. He would no longer be the carrier of my name. That name would end with me, but it would end clean, not stained by his cruelty. After the lawyer, I went to the police station. My legs trembled as I walked through the doors, not from weakness, but from courage. I told the officer what happened. I told him about the slap, about the insults, about the way my son humiliated me. I showed the red mark still visible on my face. I spoke of the pain in my heart. The officer listened, wrote it down, and promised to investigate. For the first time, I felt the law on my side, not his. I knew he would soon learn that cruelty toward a father is not just shameful. It is criminal. As I left the station, I felt lighter. Each step I took that day pulled me further away from humiliation and closer to justice. I knew that when he discovered what I had done, his arrogance would crumble. He would rush to the bank and find nothing. He would call the lawyer and hear the truth. He would face the police and feel the weight of law. His pride would shatter, and all the laughter he once threw at me would turn into silence. That day was my execution of justice. I did not raise my hand as he did. I did not shout as he did. I did not humiliate him with words. I used the tools of power he forgot I had: the bank, the pen, the law. Where his strength was in anger, mine was in control. And that control was enough to break everything he thought was secure. When I returned home that evening, I walked through the door not as a broken old man, but as a father who had taken his stand. He looked at me, unaware of what I had done, still thinking I was weak, still thinking I was under his rule. I said nothing. I simply sat in my chair, calm, quiet, holding the secret of his downfall in my heart. Because I knew soon, very soon, he would discover that the slap he gave me had cost him his entire future. The fallout came faster than I expected. It began with the bank. That same week, my son went there, as he always did, full of pride, expecting to see money waiting for him. He walked in with confidence, but he walked out pale. His accounts were empty. His cards were useless. His balance was zero. I imagine the clerk told him the truth. The money was moved. The man who once slapped me for food stood at the counter with nothing left. He came home that day with rage in his eyes. He shouted at his wife, blaming her, blaming the bank, blaming everyone but himself. He stormed into my room and demanded answers. "What happened to the money? Where did it go?" he yelled. I stayed silent. Silence was my answer. My calm silence cut deeper than his loudest words. He shouted again, his face red, his fists clenched. But for the first time, he saw something in my eyes he had not seen before: strength. The next blow came when he called the lawyer. He wanted to confirm that his future, the inheritance, was still safe. But the lawyer told him the truth. His name was gone. The will was rewritten. Every property, Every account, every piece of wealth had been reassigned. He was cut out completely. His face turned pale when he realized the home he bragged about was no longer his. The land he told his friends would one day belong to him was now promised to others. In one moment, his future disappeared. And then, the law came. A letter arrived, a notice of investigation into elder abuse. My son stood frozen as he read it. His pride, once so high, began to crumble. The neighbors saw the police car outside our gate. They whispered. They watched. The same neighbors who once looked at him with envy now looked at him with disgust. The man who once mocked his father was now seen as the son who abused him. His pride turned into shame. The fallout spread to his friends too. The ones who once laughed with him, who once drank with him, who once listened to his jokes about me. They began to pull away. Nobody wanted to stand beside a man accused of hitting his father. Nobody wanted to be seen with a man who lost everything in one stroke. His phone that once buzzed with messages grew silent. His pride that once filled the house turned into anger, confusion, and fear. And then came the moment that will forever stay in my memory. That night, while I sat in my room quietly, my phone lit up. 1 call, 2 calls, 5 calls, 10 calls. I looked at the screen, and it was his name. He kept calling. He wanted to beg, to plead, to explain. I did not answer. The calls kept coming. 20, 30, 40. By the time I put my phone down, there were 63 missed calls. 63 cries of desperation from the same man who once slapped me for asking food. Each missed call was justice. Each unanswered ring was a reminder to him that I no longer belonged to his world of cruelty. He had raised his hand against me, but now he was the one begging, desperate, and ignored. The slap he gave me had turned into silence from me, and that silence was heavier than any words I could have spoken. The fallout was complete. He lost his money. He lost his inheritance. He lost his pride. He lost the respect of neighbors and friends. He lost his peace. He was left with nothing but shame and regret, and I was left with dignity. I did not shout. I did not fight. I did not strike him back. I simply removed the foundation of his life and left him standing on nothing. The aftermath was quiet, but heavy. The house that once echoed with his loud voice, his laughter, his arrogance, was now filled with silence. He walked slower, his head bent, his eyes empty. The man who once slapped me for food now looked like a beggar inside his own walls. He no longer stormed around with confidence. He no longer bragged about wealth or future. Every step he took carried the weight of loss. At night, I could hear him pacing in the living room. His phone lit up again and again, but there were no new friends calling him, no invitations, no laughter. Only debt collectors, only questions, only reminders of what he had lost. Sometimes I could hear him whisper angrily to his wife, blaming her, blaming me, blaming fate. But deep inside, I knew he was blaming himself too. He just could not admit it out loud. The bank accounts remained empty. The lawyer's words remained final. The police investigation remained open. He tried to fight it at first, shouting that I had betrayed him, but people did not listen. Neighbors turned their heads away when he passed. Relatives stopped calling. Even his friends, who once laughed at his cruel jokes, now avoided him like a shadow. He had become a man with no respect, no money, no inheritance, and no name. And me? I lived quietly, but with peace. I ate my meals in silence, not from the floor, but from a plate filled with dignity. I no longer asked for permission to eat. I no longer lowered my head in shame. Each bite I took reminded me that I had taken back my power. Each night I slept reminded me that I had ended the cycle of cruelty. The aftermath showed me something important. Revenge does not always need loudness. It does not always need shouting or anger. Sometimes the greatest revenge is silence. Sometimes the greatest revenge is watching the person who thought he controlled you realize that he controlled nothing at all. My son thought he was strong when he slapped me. But now, every day he wakes up to emptiness. Every day he looks at his phone filled with unanswered calls. He feels weak. The shame reached further than money. It reached his soul. He could no longer stand tall in front of neighbors. He could no longer tell stories about his father. He could no longer smile with pride. Instead, he walked with his head down, his pride shattered. He had everything once, but in a moment of cruelty, he lost it all. And I lived on, not with riches of gold, but with riches of respect. People came to me quietly, offering kind words, saying they admired my strength. They told me I had done the right thing. Some even said they wished they had been as brave. And I realized that my story was not just mine. It was a lesson, that no father should suffer in silence, and no son should believe cruelty will go unpunished. The aftermath was not easy. It carried sadness too. I had lost the dream of a loving son. I had lost the hope of family warmth in my old age. But I had gained something else: justice. And justice, even when heavy, gives peace. In the end, I did not raise my hand. I did not shout. I did not curse. I simply used the quiet power that was always mine. My son thought the slap would make me weak forever, but it only gave me strength. He thought he could shame me with hunger, but in truth, he only pushed me to see the truth of who he had become. And once I saw clearly, I acted. Justice came not in fire, but in silence. I emptied his bank. I cut his name out of the will. I removed his right to carry my legacy. I gave my wealth, my home, and my dignity to causes, to people, to strangers who valued me more than he ever did. The inheritance he dreamed of vanished in one morning. The future he bragged about crumbled in a single day. The bloodline he thought would carry on with pride ended with me. Neighbors watched and whispered. They no longer envied him. They pitied him. Relatives who once smiled at his arrogance now turned their backs. His friends who once laughed with him now left him alone. And all the while, he filled my phone with desperate calls, 63 in one night, then more the next. But I did not answer. My silence was the answer. My silence was the justice. For me, life became peaceful again. I ate with dignity. I walked with pride. I lived in quiet respect, far from cruelty. I was no longer a beggar at his table. I was a man who had taken back control. And every day when I saw the empty look in his eyes, I knew he had learned the lesson. Cruelty has a cost, and disrespect destroys futures. I found peace in knowing my life's work did not die in the hands of a cruel son. It lived on through others who honored it more. I found peace in knowing I had broken the chain of abuse. I found peace in knowing I did not let humiliation be the last chapter of my story. And so, my justice was simple. He slapped me for asking food. He mocked me for being old. He thought I was powerless. But I showed him that the father he thought was weak still held the power to erase his world. Final thought. He slapped me because I asked for food. So I emptied his bank, cut his name, and left him with nothing but 63 missed calls.